Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm here with my co-hosts Gail Burke and Elliot Margolis. My name is George Binns. And for those of you who are who are fans of Fox, it's a difficult one, we're going to do the 5 minus 2. And I want to start the discussion this evening on immigration. And a lot of people, pundits especially, are pointing a finger at Donald Trump as causing the discussion about immigration either from a positive or a negative point of view. But as Gail and I discovered Monday morning, we go to the Senior Center for an event called the Current Events. And the real issue has gotten to be more a focus on what's going on in Europe. And the problem there has gotten to be very horrific. And the concern a lot of people have is we ought to do something about it. And then you raise the question of what are we going to do about it? And it gets to be awful quiet, awful quickly, because there is no easy solution. And if you think about what's causing the problem, it's the same problem that we've got in the United States, where a lot of people are coming across our border because they're looking for a better life and they're trying to escape from the horrible existence that their home countries are in right now. So we get into an issue of, well, how do we, prevent, or how do we minimize the need for people to escape from their home countries? Well, that gets you into an interesting story about how strong is the United Nations and how strong should it be. And most people in the United States would not trust the United Nations to run the world. So you end up with this very difficult situation of a guilt trip that we ought to be doing something to help these people out. And yet at the same time, how do we do that? Our economy is probably the best in the world, and yet we look at the unemployment rate and it's nothing spectacular. Could we bring a whole bunch of people in, put them to work, and get them a viable life? I don't know how to do that. And Europe is even worse shape. So the question is really open, and I think that's where the discussion ought to start is, what can you really do about all these immigrants, legal or illegal? Trump makes a valid point that we need to do something about the illegals who are criminal. It doesn't make any difference whether they're going into Europe to become jihadists, or they are jihadists and they're sneaking into Europe to cause trouble, or they're refugees from the cartels who are really seeing an opportunity in the United States to work in the drug trade here. I don't know what to do about it, and yet I think a lot of people are just totally ignoring the question, and well, somebody else will worry about it, and I think that's the feature that Trump has brought to the party. At least he's got it on the table.
Well, I think we have to look at it realistically and drop the guilt. We cannot take care of everybody. We can't do it. So I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that Trump is right. There are a lot of people coming over our borders who are criminals. And this administration refuses to do anything about it. They handcuff the police, they handcuff ICE, and then we have sanctuary cities that give refuge to these people. And what happened? Look what happened in California. A young girl was murdered by a guy that was deported 5 times and came back in. So I think we have to listen to people like Donald Trump.
We have a problem in this country, and I think in Europe the problem's even worse, and that is political correctness. And it's time to get rid of political correctness. Yes, it's nice to help other people out, but in order for us to be better able to help other people, we have to help ourselves first. We have to be in the stronger position. That takes leadership. We haven't had leadership in this country in 7 years. There's very little leadership in Europe. They're too politically correct. Stand firm, number one. Number two, like our situation with Cuba now. We've recognized Cuba as a country now. What did we get in return? Did we even get our own terrorists back to put them in our jails? The answer is no. Did we get any possibility of trying to teach the people in Cuba how to become economists the way we are in this country? The answer is no. We got nothing. I think if people could learn the way we used to do business before Obama, everybody would be better off.
Well,
and that requires leadership.
Well, the other issue that comes up is the United States is the last superpower standing. We're still the most powerful country in the world. Our influence is not that good anymore, but we are the ones who have the biggest navy, and we control the oceans, which means commerce can proceed without getting attacked by the pirates too often. Yeah, there's some instance where the pirates do get out and get on a ship and hold them ransom. But for the most part, it's our Navy that is keeping the international globalization going. And at the same time, you look at Europe, and they couldn't even fight a small war. And yet, they're very, very suspicious of the United States and not very positive towards us, except when Russia starts rattling its sabers. And, oh yeah, would you send some more tanks over? We just put the Abrams tanks back in the country. We're now sending the F-22s over there. So the world is depending on us to be the top cop and control the world. And yet we've got an administration and we've got an awful lot of people in this country who don't really feel very comfortable with that role. So the world is left with a situation of, well, maybe we'll be there, maybe we won't. We'll draw a nice red line in the sand, and we'll move it back a little bit, and we'll erase it.
It goes back to the leadership issue, George.
Yeah.
We don't have any now. A strong leader would draw that line in the sand and then do something. Ronald Reagan was probably the last strong leader that we had. And then what happened?
I would throw Bush one into that, because he went into Saudi and took the...
yeah, but he did it under the auspices of the United Nations.
Yeah, well, that's, again, that's leadership. He got everybody into the game.
True.
It wasn't like Bush, too, that said, we're going to sort out Saddam Hussein. We went in there and cleaned his clock for him. And then we left with the country, and all of a sudden we didn't know what to do with it, which raises the other issue I'm concerned about is too many countries around this world are still in a tribal level. The problem with Iraq is you've got the Sunnis, the Shiites, and the Kurds at each other's throat. And unfortunately, you have to have a real bad actor like Saddam Hussein with a real iron fist keeping them under control. We went through the same thing with Tito in Yugoslavia.
But what the mistake that this president made was he started withdrawing troops. Too many, too fast. And
Right,
he
but-
left the Iraqis in a shambles.
I think the only thing that Joe Biden has ever said or done that makes any sense, in my mind anyhow, is he wanted to divide Iraq into 3 states.
Yeah.
The Sunni state, the Shiite state, and the Kurd state. That actually makes sense because there's nothing you can do about
Well,
the
that's what
tribes.
they're doing now, just about.
Right. There's nothing you can do about the tribes. Before you go into, and this is where Bush made his mistake, before you go into a war, you have to know what you want to do, how you want to do it. You have to understand their culture. We did not understand their culture.
Yeah.
And we did not do what we needed to do to try and understand their culture.
But we still made some inroads.
We did make inroads,
And
and
that was
then
taken
Obama
away by
blew it.
Obama.
It was Obama blew
Yep.
it, no question. But that's where Joe Biden, I think, the only smart idea I think that ever came out of his mouth. But it was the right idea, in my opinion.
Okay. Can we move on to another subject?
You wore it out already? Okay. What would you like to start on?
I would like to talk about Black Lives Matter. Hands up. Don't shoot. A year ago, the town of Ferguson, Missouri was brought into, I don't want to say prominence, but was brought into the headlights,
Notoriety.
you might say. Notoriety. When a young black thug was killed by a policeman. Now, when the episode first happened, the President of the United States jumped in, as well as the Attorney General of the United States. And of course, whenever there's a black victim, the Reverend Al and Jesse Jackson appeared almost days after it happened. Well, they made comments, racial comments, because it was a white policeman that shot this thug. And we later found out that if he hadn't done that, he would have been killed. Well, a year later, first of all, the policeman lost his job, or he quit because he was getting threatened. His family was getting threatened. A year later, there's still violence in Ferguson. This Black Lives Matter group, which is a far-left hate group, has gone into Ferguson
Financed
again.
by George Soros.
That's right. And many of his organizations that are criminals.
That was the other thing that got to be really interesting, is after the first wave of trouble in Ferguson, a lot of the Black Lives Matter were picketing because they didn't get paid.
Well, these
The
groups.
spontaneity of that organization bothers me.
Well, there's no spontaneity there, George. I think you know that. But what has happened in the meantime, we had incidents in Baltimore, and we've had them all over the country, with the police becoming victims.
Well, keep in mind that this didn't start with Ferguson. The first couple of months Obama was in office, a police officer from Cambridge
That's right.
was doing his job.
Yep.
He sees somebody trying to break into a house, and he goes and he arrests him. He was doing his job, and he says, you know, the Cambridge police acted stupidly.
Yep.
Now, there was Obama has to be one of the 5 worst racists in the country today. That was a racist statement by Obama right there. Then you go to Trayvon Martin. He could have been my son. Well, you know, Trayvon Martin was not a little angel either.
No, he wasn't. But they kept showing pictures of him when he was 10 years old.
Right.
Well, he wasn't 10 years old.
Right.
He was 18 years
So-
old and
so
a big strapping guy.
The point being, this has been building for the past 7 years.
Right.
Our society now has not been this racist since the 60s.
You're right.
Since George Wallace. And look what's happened in 7 years. I can tell you from personal experience, I have black customers, I see black people on a fairly regular basis. They're good people. And they're not racist people. And they've had good opportunities in the past 30, 40 years and have done very well in this country.
Look at Ben Carson. He's a
right.
presidential candidate.
The only ones that haven't done well are the lazy ones that aren't working.
Well, unfortunately, you get the Al Sharptons that portray blacks and minorities as victims. Well, I'm sorry, they're not victims.
Well, I think it's a little more deeper than that. Matt Taibbi wrote a book about living in the low rent district, and that's my term for it. And no matter who's the ethnic group in the low rent district, it is a rough neighborhood. It is tough. I can remember seeing the movie The Gangs of New York. It's all about the Irish gangs. Then you had The Godfather, which was all about the Italian gangs.
Mm-hmm.
And it just goes on and on. We had a series of, well, what about the posses? Well, it's the Jamaicans. And just about every ethnic group that gets stuck in the low rent district, there is a criminal element that just blossoms,
Yeah.
whether you like it or not.
But why are they in the low rent district? They claim because our skin is black, people are prejudiced against us. But you don't see Asians doing the same types of things that black people are doing. But what you do see...
You got to remember the Tong Wars.
But what you do see, when you go to college campuses today, okay, you see a lot of Asian kids there.
now you're getting into the Tiger Mother episodes, where certain ethnic groups have a strong desire to do extremely well, and they believe you do that through education. There's a depressing article in, I think it was CNN about 2 days ago, that September 1st is the date of the highest number of suicides in Japan. Why? Because that's the day that the announcements come out of who got into college, and who didn't. You look at the same situation in Korea. The demand to get into the college is horrendous, and the wear and tear on the kids is really brutal.
But I think you have to include the element of the strength of the family.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the government, during the 60s and 70s, interfered with the black family. And the people that were...
every family.
They did, but...
You go into Appalachia and you've got the same kind of a problem where you have people who are not in a very well-to-do environment, and the job opportunities, and that's one of my pet peeves about the EPA shutting down the coal mines, but that's another story for another night. But there are places around the country where this problem is universal, every low-rent district. And the thing that I think, there was a grandmother, a black grandmother, who got on TV, and she got onto the Black Lives Matter group and says, well, what about the gang killings? And you look at what's going on in the cities, and part of the problem with the rejection of the police in most of the cities is not only are the police not very well taken care of, they're victims, they're targets, but at the same time, they're very, very reluctant to take on a tough situation. And
well, you can't blame them.
Understand, so it's a spiral down.
Well, but a lot of the families on welfare were able to get more money, and they were told if the father is not in the home, and that began the split up of the black families. Now, there's a Milwaukee County sheriff. His name is David Clark, who has been on several of the news stations, and he is furious at this Black Lives Matter, the hands up, don't shoot business. And he said that he is sick and tired of these groups coming in, and particularly they go into the places like Ferguson where there has been trouble, and they stir up more trouble. And, you know, he says now that it's open season on police. And we can see that in the news because in the last 7 days, 7 policemen have been murdered. Not shot in, preventing a crime. They have been murdered. There were 2 in New York, 2 minority cops, I might add, that were shot in their patrol car.
Well,
so something is going on.
Just today, there was a shooting of a police cruiser in this town of Millis, Mass.
I heard that.
So... but see, part of the problem, the way I look at it, is what I call feel-good legislation. And the feel-good legislation is like our METCO program here in Massachusetts. We take some kids from the inner city Boston, and we let some of them go to the suburbs to get educated. And saying, gee, aren't we doing something nice for the black community, and we're letting them get educated? What's the matter with all the black kids? Why is it just some of them? But, the state legislature, in their infinite wisdom, thinks they're doing the black community a favor by letting some of the kids go and get a good education.
Would you call that tokenism?
Well...
I would say, well, that's what the beauty of charter schools.
Right.
And unfortunately, charter schools are mostly in the poorer sections of each city.
And why is it that people want to send their kids to charter schools?
Exactly.
And then you ask yourself, why is it that the politicians don't want the charter schools? And the answer is very simple. Most charter schools are not union,
That's right.
And the politicians are Democrats. The Democrats want the unions. It's that simple. They don't care about education. They care about getting reelected.
Right. Well, there's going to be a rally in Boston a week from Saturday. I believe it's the 12th at 11 o'clock. And a local radio host, Jeff Cooner, is sponsoring this rally. And it's to promote the police. And he's urging everyone, if they can, to go into Boston, and maybe this time, because he's advertising it. He had a rally in Boston last week. It was about immigration. The Boston Globe didn't mention it. The Boston Herald, barely. The local radio stations wouldn't cover it. So he's sending notices to all of them that this rally is going to take place, and he hopes to get thousands and thousands of people.
I hope he does.
I do too.
Now we'll move on to my topic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about Iran. And I want to talk about Iran for a number of reasons. Number one is that our congressman is voting in favor of the project of Obama and Kerry. And just today, the Senate decided there's 34 senators who are going to vote in favor of the bill, so that it's veto proof. It's veto proof.
Yeah.
But one of the things that the Democrats are talking about is some kind of a plan is better than no plan at all, and this was the best that we could do. There was nothing else we could do. I humbly disagree with that. It's my thought that had we shown leadership, and that leadership comes up every once in a while, like every time, had we shown leadership and took all 6 members of that negotiating group and said, no, let's not accept this, let's make sure they don't get any opportunity to have any nuclear arms ever, and tighten the restrictions on them, I think we could have done better. That was the option. The option was saying no. And
They wouldn't do it.
and we showed again, no guts, no glory.
Well,
by
I
the
think
time they
what's-
got down to the point of signing all the documents and all the secret agreements, there's nothing left. They gave away the store, and the problem I have with this thing is it sounds so much like the negotiations that Clinton ran with North Korea
Right.
on the same issue of nuclear proliferation.
And how'd that work out, George?
I think they set off 3 bombs so far.
Hmm.
And last I heard is Kim Il-jung is going to attack the United States.
And in the meantime, what's happening to our military? This president is making it smaller and smaller. And that's frightening. And then, of course, we have Israel. What is Israel going to do? What is Egypt going to do? Some of these countries are now talking about getting their own nuclear
Well,
bombs.
they've got to.
So this president could very likely set off nuclear warfare in the world.
Well, it's not going to be nuclear warfare first. It's just going to be everybody will join the nuclear club. And we will have bombs all over the place. And
And you put them in the hands of some crazies. And
that's the scary part,
yeah.
because Iran and Iraq and a lot of these countries have got some really bad characters running loose, and they're supported by the governments. And the chances of them getting their hands on something, just enough material to make a dirty bomb, and it can make one heck of a mess in this world. And somebody's going to get even. I mean, we've lived through a number of years where Pakistan and India were eyeball to eyeball over the border. And each one of them has got nuclear weapons. And the reason Pakistan got them? Because India got them. And what did Pakistan do? They taught the North Koreans how to make them. It's expanding, and there's, like you said, there's just a lack of leadership, and there's a lack of, I think, taking the UN to where it ought to be.
The UN we ought to get out of. We ought to send it from New York to someplace else.
send it to Geneva.
We don't need the UN in New York, and we don't need the UN. What does the UN do? If the UN did its job under its charter, why do we have so many wars?
Well, that's an exaggeration. Under its charter, the UN, and goes back to Franklin Roosevelt, he cut a deal with Russia that after World War II, he looked the other way when Russia moved into Eastern Europe. And Harry Truman, curiously enough, got caught in that because he jumped all over Russia when he took over, and they had to go back and apologize because he inherited a deal. But the thing is, the UN we need to have something like the UN, that somebody is in charge of something and does something about it. Unfortunately, the UN and the Blue Helmets do not have a very positive image in the world. They're more trouble than they're worth. And with the whole military in the world in the hands of the United States, nobody else can really support anything the UN wants to do. So we're back to my favorite issue of, do we become the world's cop or not? Either de facto or just by...
Well, I don't think we have to become the world's cop, but we need to have a leader who can rally these other countries, particularly the Europeans, because they're right in the line of fire as well.
Yeah,
You know, and then we have to think about Russia.
well, you think
What
about
is
that
Russia
train
doing?
incident. It was a Brit and 3 Americans that saved the train.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the Soviet Union, Russia, has had plenty of terrorism in that country.
Yeah.
And what are they doing about it? It would seem to me, if we had a leader who could sit down with Putin and say, let's talk. There's an issue, there's a problem that we all have. Maybe we can all get together and try and fight this thing. Instead of having the Russians support the Syrians or support some people in Iraq, why can't we talk to them and say, look, let's defeat terrorism together?
Yeah.
We have worked together before. World War II is the example of that. And why can't we work together to defeat terrorism? Because it affects all of us.
Yeah.
And I think on that note, we're going to have to end. But before we do, I have a little announcement to make.
That was pretty profound, though, to end that way.
There's a group, there's many groups throughout the country that are fighting back against Common Core. And there's a group in Massachusetts that had filed to get a petition on the ballot in Massachusetts for the 2016 election to get rid of Common Core and park testing. And just this week, our Attorney General has said that she will allow the petition to at least go to the next step, which is to gather signatures. They have to get, I forget how many, 200,000 or 100,000 signatures in order to get it on the ballot. So I would urge people to keep their ears open and their eyes open and find out more about this. And if you're willing to participate and gather signatures or talk to your neighbors about it, you can email me at garden39@comcast.net. And don't forget the rally a week from Saturday in Boston.
Give the date, because this is not being...
September 12th. Thank you. We will see you next time. Thank you for watching. And we hope to see you next week. Thanks again.